Well, welcome into the second episode of New Zealand Swimming's Take Your Marks. Today on the program, we're going to catch up with one of New Zealand's best swimmers, and these days, somebody who's establishing himself as one of New Zealand's leading coaches, Andy McMillan, the head coach of the North Shore Swim Club. Now, Andy, as in his own right, represented New Zealand at the Commonwealth Games in 2006 and then the Olympic Games in London. And why I decided to get Andy on the program is he's got some good stories in and around transitioning from being an elite athlete into the workforce, but also some of the lessons that he's taken and the disciplines that he learned as an elite athlete and how he's now applying those in the role of a high-performance coach. We'll also discuss a little bit about trying to get that balance right between, say, the technical component of swimming, the tactical component, and then quality versus quantity in the pool. And what does he agree with? Does he like the idea of having multiple coaches around the country and multiple clubs within the regions, all adding athletes to this overall high-performance program? Or does he believe in a centralized coaching program? Well, Andy McMillan, good afternoon, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Andy, let's talk a little bit about your swimming career. Where did it all start for you?
Started in small town Cromwell in Central Otago, moved its way to Dunedin under the watchful eye or sometimes closed eyes of Mr. Duncan Lang, the late great, and then transitioned to Auckland with Jane Cameron, late Jane Cameron as well, and then to Australia briefly for my kind of finishing my career there.
At what point in your swimming career did you actually start to realise you had a bit of ability and a bit of talent?
Well, the pools used to be shut in winter in Central Otago, so I used to only train in the summer, and we used to go pretty well as a young junior, and I loved the water, so it was hard to keep me out of it. I loved other sports, so we had the same rugby team, soccer team, basketball team, for everything, and we played a lot of water sports in that area of New Zealand, surrounded by water and rivers and lakes. So yeah, through the age groups I kept improving, so I really had a love for it, so I continued to see how far I could take it.
Yeah, and when did goals like Commonwealth Games and the Olympics sort of first start to really come into your head and something to really target and focus?
Yeah, I think the Olympics was the one thing that everyone that's in an Olympic sport aspires to chase. The Commonwealth Games was a stepping stone for me for that, along with world champs and things like that. But yeah, that was always the kind of the big carrot dangling. We had a lot of success, or Mr. Lang had a lot of success in his program with former Olympians, some incredible names, and obviously Daniel who brought back the purse in 92 and 96, 2 golds and a silver. So yeah, it was always around the program. There was always a lot of interest, and being a part of that, I guess, made you feel pretty special, and you wanted to contribute to Mr. Lang's legacy almost as much as your own development. It was pretty special.
And what came first, the Commonwealth Games or the Olympics?
Commonwealth Games, I went to Melbourne 2006 as a 20-year-old. Good doing, man. Yeah.
The pinnacle of your swimming career for you?
Oh, London Olympics for sure. There's always little moments along the way that help you get to the big moments, but I had 2 relays in the London Olympics, and the first one didn't go the way we wanted to, the 4x2, and I luckily had another chance to compete in the 4x100 medley, which was a real race. We managed a 9th position. We were 0.06 off the final, which I've accepted now, but it took me a while. But it was a real race, and we were in against the Japanese and the Americans head for head. We were coming third for a good portion of the race, and it was just a rush. That was the experience I'd made in my head, and leaving it all out there in the pool was just incredible. And you walk around on cloud 9 for a week or so after that, I tell you.
You retired from swimming after the London Olympics, but you kept your sporting career going. You would go on and captain the New Zealand surf lifesaving team to a number of world championships.
Yep. So that was always another passion, I guess. The water again. So moving to Dunedin, got a bit more exposure to the ocean and surfing and being involved with the community club, like a lifesaving club. I think that's one thing that's really special about surf lifesaving. It's literally your community and volunteers providing a service for the public. So it's pretty up there with things to do for other people. You're not in it just for yourself, you're in it for the team, and you're in it for life, as the lifesavers say. And the Captain New Zealand was an absolute privilege, and we've had some success over the years, but Aussie they had the stranglehold on us for some time. I think it was 14 years between drinks for us to win the World Championship title, but we got a good run on there, and I went out on probably one of my best World Champs in 2016, where we won it for the third year, and we won the pool competition and the beach competition, something that never been done before. So that was a real highlight.
And the transitioning from being an athlete to getting into the workforce, I mean, swimming's been your point of difference amongst your peer group, let's say that. It's also been arguably maybe your sense of self-worth. Was it a difficult transition?
Yeah, well, I definitely didn't go through school thinking I'd become a teacher, and I didn't think I'd be a swim coach because I really struggled with mornings as an athlete. So I've become a teacher and now a swim coach. So two things I didn't think I'd do, but I think it was a natural gravitation that was probably embedded with all my experiences through coaches and people that have tried to help me. I really value kindness and people giving time to each other, and being a coach, you're giving a lot of time, but when you have those magical moments and people hit those targets and goals I've been after, it's such a great sense of satisfaction and something that drives me. Transitioning from an athlete though, it was relatively tough, because I think when you're an athlete near the top of your game and a bit more mature, I was 27, 28, 30 when I finished surf lifesaving. So, there's a lot that and you take in as an athlete, but there's a hell of a lot more out there to learn as a coach. I'm reading people, working with different people, because everyone's got their own story, everyone's got their own way of operating, and it all comes down to relationships. If you can't form a good relationship with an athlete, then it's going to be a difficult road ahead. So the better you can connect and understand each other, the more success you'll ultimately have.
At what point though in your swimming career did you become conscious of ensuring that you did have something to fall back on?
I think as a student athlete going through, you're always conscious of your friends that have graduated and into their professional lives, and that's happening 23 years old, and to miss the Olympics at that age and then decide to go another 4 years was a big call, big sacrifice, but I knew that's something I'd regret for the rest of my life if I didn't chase it. So, there's the financial side of things that you've got in the back of your head. So you want to make sure you've got something to lean back on. So after the Olympics, I committed a year of teachers college just to have that in, so I could transition into a role. And I was lucky to get a great job at St. Peter's College in Auckland, which is a fantastic school in Newmarket there. But amazing skills to learn through that. And I think near the end, you're starting to look at a lifestyle perspective as a coach, as an athlete. You really like the scene, you like the interactions you're having. So I think those interactions started to kind of twist my arm a bit more, being involved in those, teams that go away, traveling, touring around the world. It's something you want to do for the rest of your life. So being a coach, you can achieve that too.
Yeah, you've touched on some of the attributes that you need to have as a coach. What was the most challenging thing as a coach, and did it give you a greater appreciation of the roles that the Duncan Langs and the Jan Camerons played in your life?
Oh, 100%. Everyone's got their own unique style. Obviously, there's two completely different styles there. Both really great at relationships. One a technician, one a tactician, and there's some of those attributes that you think about, how you're implementing them into your workforce and building a team around you. So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that you don't pick up as an athlete, and I think you're in a lot more of an emotional roller coaster, because you're living all the individuals' moments as well as the collective moment, and as an athlete it's quite internal as your own kind of achievements and things like that. So balancing time, energy, emotion. I think they're probably some of the toughest things to come into a coach's role.
Mm. Now that you've been a coach, if you could take the knowledge that you've taken on board in the last few years, you could go back and be an athlete, would you be a better swimmer?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. Finishing up 2012 and starting a teaching role and starting a bit of a business on the side, starting a family. When I was training for surf lifesaving, I had very limited opportunities to train. It was literally from 2 to 5 opportunities I get to train, and I was grateful I had a huge base from my years with Mr. Lang, and it really magnified how important each session is and everything you're doing inside of that session, every single detail that you're doing. And if you drill that in young enough, and that becomes part of your natural habits and your performance behaviours, then you're only going to have a better polished product at the end of the day. And I think I was the type of athlete that got by on work, but also a fair bit of talent. And because I thought I was doing the Ks, I thought I could be, cut corners up other places, and that's certainly not the way. You can't afford to have any weaknesses these days, and no matter how much talent you have, you're not going to see your full potential unless you're working 100% as an athlete.
You mentioned 2 words earlier with your 2 different coaches, tactician and technician, and that sort of sums up sport. Swimming, it is a taught sport, very much governed by good technique, but it's also a non-weight bearing sport, so therefore you can push athletes quite hard, and they tend to be chasing the clock a lot. And in doing so, they can often end up overcompensating and reinforce bad habits. How much emphasis on technique versus the hour mile mentality, I guess?
Well, it's completely changed, that's for sure. But I think a healthy dose of all of those is the right way. I think it's not. I think the phrase should be smarter and harder, because someone out there is working harder than you, and if they're working smarter, then you've got some make up to do. So we're in the middle of a 2-week block right now. We've got a really short window. We didn't rest completely for our last competition because we want to really give ourselves a good top up. So we're doing a 2-week block of really serious work, and then moving into real race specific work. So I think, macrocycles, mesocycles and microcycles are changing a lot, but they used to be quite traditional in how they were placed and where they were placed, but now I think a lot more planning comes around recovery and your meets and what you're gearing up for. So you can fit a lot in 8 weeks. You can get fit pretty quick and get into some good race shape in 8 weeks. So we've got an 8-week block now, but I want to make sure we've got some good work behind us that we can finish races. But in that same sentence, not everyone reacts to the same work. So I've got a young 18-year-old boy who's he eats the 8K sessions up, wants more, and he handles it. Where I've got another 18-year-old boy who's actually smaller and leaner, who you'd think would handle it better, is actually hurting more from it. So you've got to be careful. We're working on a game of fine margins, and you never want to push them off the edge to crash. You want to hold them, hanging them off the edge, so they've got the feet on the ground still, but they're leaning over that edge as long as they can before we rest them, pull them back.
Yeah, and your ability to work on technique, the technical side of the sport, are you complete in that area, or where do you seek guidance from? How do you look at the hydrodynamics of the sport and then pass that instruction on?
Yeah, well, we do a lot of work on scull, field, drill work, but in terms of my development, obviously over lockdown there's been lots of opportunities to reach out to coaches, and a lot of the best coaches in the world have been holding development opportunities. So last year at the World Champs, I met a man named Sergio Lopez, who's a fantastic breaststroke coach, and that would be my weakest stroke as an athlete and also in knowledge. So we've got an IM program essentially at North Shore, and breaststrokes makes up a quarter of that. So we've got to be on for all strokes. So I've been picking his brain on what successful breaststroke looks to him, and it looks different for a lot of different people and body shapes and things like that. But in terms of principles, his is a really simple principle that I like to connect with, and our breaststroke's going pretty well at the moment.
Okay, so just for maybe young swimmers watching this, you've been the athlete, you're now the coach. I think you've given some really good insight. What is the message? I mean, what is the key now to being a good swimmer?
You got to love what you're doing at the end of the day. If you're not loving it, it's going to be a long, drawn-out heartbreak. You've got to love it, and it's not an easy sport. So I think acknowledging some of those things up front, that and that it's a tough sport and it's a long game and it doesn't happen overnight. I think if you can go into that and keep that in your mind and play the long game, then you'll get to where you want to. But it takes a big commitment, a lot of sacrifice, but you've got to enjoy it. So you want to be surrounded by people you like being around. You've got to make the effort to make it work.
In regards to the coaching setup here in New Zealand, do you believe in having a whole lot of coaches around the country across a whole lot of different clubs, or you believe sort of more in a centralized type program?
Well, we've seen both recently, but if we want to grow the sport, I'm a big believer we want to work on the major cities that have universities, have long course meter pools, have access to support teams. And I think working on those regions, inviting people into those regions, it's only going to lift that region and the coaches all around that region. I think the risk of a centralised program is that it can get quite closed off, or feels closed off potentially, and it can be quite lonely. I think, like I said before, it's a pretty tough sport. We want to have a great community around us, so the more we can link into the grassroots, show these kids aspiring Olympians and current Olympians, the better. And sometimes in centralised programs, we can't capture that. But I'm more in favour of working on each region, or 5 key regions or 4 key regions, wherever you need to start with, and build those regions and build the kids around the clubs in those regions.
And how important that the coaches get together and share ideas.
Totally. And I think that's where Swim New Zealand are heading. They're looking at targeted programs. They've worked on targeted athletes, coaches, and now the final piece of the puzzle is the programs. And you look down the country where all the successful swimmers are, they've got pretty experienced coaches already, and bringing people into those programs to see how they do things it's a good way to develop coaches, give them ideas, not to say they have to copy everything, but they can make their own mind up from what they're seeing in those programs.
Andy McMillan, we appreciate your time on the program.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that catch up there with Andy McMillan. We do wish him all the very best with his coaching career and the North Shore Swim Club. Now, part 2 of this episode we'll bring to you next week, and we will feature young Brianna Crawford. What a swimming sensation she is. We're going to catch up with Brianna and talk to her about just balancing life, school, and just trying to get everything right at such an important time in her young life.